I reckon this one might be too far gone. Get a load of that. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the more frustrating aspects of growing cacti and succulents, and I guess plants more generally, and that of course is pests. Little creepy crawlies that quite literally suck the life out of the plants that we cherish. Today I'm going to be covering off on some of the more common pests that you might find among cacti and succulents, how to prevent them, what to do if you do notice them among your collection, and why we shouldn't be jumping at shadows, why not every insect is necessarily a bad thing to find amongst our plants. I'm going to be using this pretty gnarled pest-chewed pair of Stenocereus seedlings as my exemplars. So join me now as we learn all about the horrible world of pests. Now, before we chew into the meat of the issue, it's well worth knowing a very important truth, and that is that pests are often a symptom of a greater underlying issue. What do I mean by that? Well, it's very simple. Healthy plants are better equipped at dealing with pests all by themselves. They don't necessarily need human intervention. But unhealthy plants, stressed plants, dormant plants, they're the ones that are often targeted by pests. And so if we are finding ourselves dealing with big infestations, it might well be worth looking at ourselves and our own cultivation practices to figure out why that's happened. Are the plants getting enough light? Is there enough airflow? Is the soil too moisture retentive, or does it drain far too quickly? These are some of the reasons why we might be seeing pests in our collection. For me, typically, I find that these plants are pest-free for most of the year, but when they go dormant, I might find little pockets of things moving in here, and that's when I need to be very wary. That old adage, prevention is better than a cure, is certainly the case when we're dealing with pests in the greenhouse or in our collection. It's a lot easier to stop them from getting in than dealing with them once they are there. But if they do move in, there are certainly some things we can do about it as well. The sky is open, the rain is coming down. I've had to sacrifice my hat in the name of protecting the camera, but we persist. The first pest I want to talk to you about is perhaps the most iconic of all plant pests, and that is the humble mealybug. They are these little white insects and often can be discovered through the appearance of this thick, white waxy coating that they cover themselves in. It's really quite gross, especially when there's a lot of them all over a plant. Mealybugs come in a couple of different varieties. There's the classic obvious one. Here I'm using a cotton pad to simulate the appearance of mealies on a plant. So you've got the classic, which appears above ground, and then you've got the far more insidious version, hard to detect, root mealybug, which appears exclusively below the soil line. Now, if you spot mealybugs in your collection, there's a very simple way of dealing with them, and I'll go into that now. Now, mealybugs above the soil line, easy to spot. Mealybugs below, much more difficult. How do you detect root mealybug? Well, what I will typically do is, if I find any of my plants declining in health, one of the first things I will do is I'll take it out of its soil. Sometimes it's rot, sometimes there's other underlying issues, and very occasionally it is a case of root mealy. Now, if you do have an infestation of mealybug, there are two approaches you might take. The first of those is using a contact pesticide, something like neem oil or horticultural soap, or what I like to use, undiluted alcohol, in this case isopropyl alcohol. It's fantastic. It just absolutely wrecks mealybugs on contact. All you need to do, get them and just go to town. The plants will be absolutely fine. The only exception are plants that have got that kind of waxy coating on them, that farina. Plants like your echeverias, some of your cacti. If you've got a plant that has a farina, the alcohol will strip that away as well. But so too will most contact products. And so you're going to need to be very careful about how you treat them. And that might be an instance where you move on to option 2, which is the nuclear option. What I'm talking about here is using a systemic pesticide, something like imidacloprid. Now, this stuff is so potent that it actually has been banned in many jurisdictions all over the world. The reason for that is because it gets up into the sap of the plant, and then any insect that feeds from it will very promptly die. That sounds great, right? Until you realize that it's untargeted. And so a bee coming along drinking nectar from a flower is going to get whacked just as much as a mealybug. And so using a systemic product like this needs to be dealt with very, very carefully. I would never use it in an open air collection like this, only in a space where I'm controlling the plants. And really, if you've got a mealybug infestation, you should be separating them from the rest of your collection anyway. So use imidacloprid or any other systemic insecticide with very, very strong caution, but it will take care of them very effectively. Now the next nasty we need to talk about are spider mites. They're insidious little suckers who get onto your plants and literally suck them dry. Real little pricks of an animal, I tell you what. Now, the typical spider mite that most people will deal with are colloquially known as red spider mites. They're tiny, microscopic little things. They're almost impossible to see with the naked eye. And just like mealybugs, they get in and they drink the sap. Unlike mealybugs though, they're not insects. And so insecticides like your imidacloprid will have no impact whatsoever. There are some products, they're a little bit hard to source, that are systemics. Something like this one, Kilomite, which has an active constituent called abamectin, will take care of them. But for me, if I'm dealing with mites, I like to use horticultural soap. This is a product that kind of just smothers mites. It will just absolutely drench them in this sticky white stuff, stops them from breathing and kills them. You do need to reapply it though, because what you'll find is that mites have got a very quick turnaround in terms of their life cycle. They'll lay eggs, those eggs will hatch, those little babies will lay their own eggs, and the cycle continues on and on. And so what you need to do is spray with your horticultural soap about once a week for several weeks until you've broken that egg hatching cycle. Now spider mites are typified by the appearance of very fine, delicate webbing, and when there's a big colony of them, it'll really get in amongst the plants themselves. It's quite a hideous appearance. And then where they're sucking the sap out, you'll find this kind of discoloured stippling all over the plant. They thrive in dry conditions, so you can actually kind of deal with them in an environmental way if you keep your plants a little bit more well watered and the space around them a little bit more humid. But for me, spider mites have never been a problem. I actually have a different type of mite that causes me headaches on occasion, and it's what caused this hideous damage to these little Stenocereus. They're called false spider mites. It took me a very long time to diagnose this issue because false spider mites are kind of the opposite. They don't create webs at all, and they thrive in humid conditions. So here I am trying to deal with these red spider mites by upping the water, increasing the humidity. All it's doing is making these guys happy. Now, deal with them in exactly the same way. Douse the thing in soap and away you go. Repeat the process and they'll eventually disappear. But what I find generally is that if I've got happy, healthy plants, I don't have mite issues, because they are by far the most annoying little bastards that I've ever had to deal with while growing cacti and succulents. Now the next pest is called scale, and this one is an insect. Doesn't really look like one though, because what you'll find is that these little tiny bugs will actually create a shield over them, a protective scale, so to speak. And that's how you can identify them. This is a plant that actually dealt with an outbreak of scale a little bit earlier in the year. You can see these little bumps all over it. And when it comes to scale, they are insects, so you can deal with them with a systemic insecticide like imidacloprid. That's how I killed them off on this one. This one isn't flowering size yet, so I wasn't too worried about anything else. However, scale can actually be removed physically if the infestation isn't too big. There are some versions of scale that are soft scale, in which case you could just scrub them off with a toothbrush. They're a bit harder, a bit more stubborn. A fingernail or even a knife can be used to pry them off the plant. Now, of course, if you've got a really, really bad infestation, that's not very practical. but it is a consideration. Otherwise, you can go back to your usual insect soaps to smother them. Just kills them by preventing them from breathing. Alcohol is another great way of doing it as well. Any of those contact pesticides are an absolutely viable approach. And the last of the pests I want to address today is fungus gnats. They're like these tiny little black fly things. They emerge from the soil and they can get into real infestation territory very quickly, especially if you keep your plants indoors. The thing about fungus gnats is that they really are indicative of an issue with culture, because what you'll find is that they thrive in really rich, organic, moisture-attentive soils, the sort of stuff that isn't really well suited to cacti and succulents. They are a big problem for indoor plant growers though. Now, if you are an indoor plant grower, getting rid of them is nigh on impossible. You can get these yellow sticky strips, you can use neem oils, you can try and use sort of physical barriers. I've found that none of them actually work. They're just super impossible to eradicate. But if you're growing cacti and succulents, we're at an advantage here, because what I would be doing is using this as an opportunity to change how you do things. And the first thing I'd be doing is taking my plant out of its waterlogged organic soil. Just a bit like this. We get our plant, get the soil off the roots. What you'll find is that fungus gnats actually lay their eggs in that moisture-rich soil. And it's not the flies themselves that do damage to the plants, it's the larvae underground that will chew on the roots and degrade its health. So you get as much of the soil off the roots as absolutely physically, humanly possible. I'm just being a bit rough here. Plants, they usually can take this sort of stuff. Get as much of it off. Might even be a good opportunity to do a bit of root pruning, and then replant your plant into a far more mineral, moisture draining substrate, and that should really take care of the problem without too many issues. Now, what you don't want to do is freak out about any old insect in your collection, because most of them are harmless and some of them are actually beneficial. Almost every time I put a close-up of a plant in this greenhouse up on YouTube, I get people kind of giving me a warning they've spotted webbing. Sure sign of spider mites. No, in this case, this place is just full of spiders. I've got millions and millions of spiders living in here, little tiny ones. You know what they're doing? They're dealing with a lot of the pest problems for me. They love eating little insects that might otherwise want to eat my plants. Ants as well don't necessarily cause a big problem. Interesting thing about ants is that they can actually farm things like mealybugs. They'll pick them up, carry them, put them on plants and drink from the secretions produced by the mealybugs. But if you don't find ants are actually creating a mealybug problem, they don't do anything to your plants themselves. In fact, this seems like a good opportunity to share with you. If you've been watching this channel for a little while, you'll recognise this as my ant plant, Myrmecodia platytyrea, Australian native. And the other day, I discovered it had actually been colonised by a little family of ants. It's really actually very exciting. All they're doing is bringing benefits to this guy in the form of food scraps as a form of fertiliser. So don't just naturally assume that any bug in your collection is a baddie. Keep an eye out for those telltale signs, observe your plant health, and if you do see a decline, you know how to deal with it. But, and I have to reiterate this, if you are going to use systemics in any way, be very, very careful about their application, because they have very strong environmental consequences. And before I go, I do want to give myself a quick plug. Arid merch is available, some pretty rad t-shirts. If you're a real diehard, I've got a Patreon now with all sorts of bonus content and exclusive merch, like physical zines. How sick is that? Also, hit like, hit subscribe, because it all helps. I love you guys. You're awesome, a fantastic audience. Did you know I've been around for 1 year now yesterday? I can't believe how far this channel's come in 1 year. Happy birthday to Aridzine, right? Anyway, I hope this has been informative and I hope you've enjoyed what I've been talking about, and maybe now you're better equipped to deal with any of the little pests that get in here and destroy our collections. Until next time, happy growing, and I'll see you then.